Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Red Hour on the Midwestern Marks YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere live streams are sold. We're happy to be with you. I got Carlos and Noah with me today. We're going to be talking about some Teamsters strikes that were going on, a victory for the UPS workers. We'll also be talking about some of the writer strikes that have been going on, some of the tactics that the unions have been doing there, working with the Teamsters to shut down a Marvel shoot, actually, which is a pretty big deal. So we'll be looking into that. And also we'll be breaking down a video that we got from our Stream React suggestions on Discord. Join the Discord server by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. And then you can send us videos that you want us to react to. So the video we'll be reacting to today from Discord is called Why Americans Are Obsessed with Communism. It's sort of a liberal analysis of the Cold War that's critical of the Korean War and Vietnam War, but definitely has a lot of issues. So we'll be deconstructing that, and that should be fun. And yeah, we'll get right into that after we play the International. All right, looks like we already got our first super chat. Lemonheads, consistent super chat supporter of Midwestern Mark. Sorry, Noah just caught me playing a game on my second stream while the intro was playing. I didn't think anyone could see, but I was sharing my screen. I was like playing a flash game. If aliens came down, would all nations unite? I think the most realistic depiction of what would happen if aliens came down is from the movie District 9. Where they basically lock the aliens into a slum and it becomes like a ghetto filled with crime and prostitution and things like that. And then there's also racial discrimination against the aliens in that movie. So that's my interpretation of what would happen. Unless I don't know, what would happen if they were like trying to conquer us?
Right. The question is, they're evil aliens. So we often assume they're good aliens, right?
True.
Like, who's the weird French guy that has like the alien, like his whole thing was the Soviets began the space race because actually they met these alien communists who must be communists because they've gotten so far as to be able to visit other, a whole thing.
Posada?
Yeah, Posadas. Yes.
No, he's not French. He's where's he from?
French.
No, he's from South America, I think.
I know he lived in South America, but I'm pretty sure he was French.
French background? Oh, okay, I don't know.
But, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's whatever, you know. But so if they're evil aliens, will all nations unite? This assumes that this is possible, right? And under the conditions of global capitalism, it is absolutely impossible. So I'm thinking what would happen is you'd get some sellouts to the aliens, and then you get the nations that stand up to them, right? Or would it start like an all-out war because they're conquering, and then, you know, imperialist nations would at the same time be trying to use that to their advantage just to keep their system afloat, and at the same time, this is energizing the people in those imperialist nations. So I think if the evil aliens came down, it could spur on a revolutionary movement in the imperialist nations, therefore leading to all nations uniting.
I think that if they got here, they have to have a more advanced mode of production than we do, and um, using a sort of more orthodox understanding of Marxism. Perhaps that means that their relations of production are more advanced than ours, and therefore I if we hit a fetter with capitalism, and perhaps what goes beyond that is something else. I don't know. I think that if they're more advanced than us technologically, they might be more advanced than us in terms of human relationality, which makes it, I think, more likely that they're good aliens than bad aliens. So, but maybe they're not. I don't know. Maybe that's too dogmatic of a Marxist interpretation of it. I'm not sure. I haven't given aliens much of a thought since like
evil aliens.
Evil aliens, yeah.
Do you know how often I get asked on TikTok what post-sadism is? I had no idea it had to do with aliens, but that makes sense why people on TikTok are so fascinated with it.
And dolphins. Apparently, dolphins are like water aliens to Posadas.
If Joe Rogan were to have like Eddie on, I feel like one of the questions would likely be about Posada and aliens and come. It seems like the sort of topic that's right. Maybe that's how we should pitch it to him. Like, hey, we got this guy that's got like the best theory about aliens. Let's talk. And then the first 5 minutes, it's Posadaism, and then boom, Marxism, and for the rest of the interview.
We want to revisit your dolphin thesis from your stand-up comedy in 2001, where he says he's high on a boat and he thinks maybe dolphins are smarter than humans.
By the way, his old stand-up is great. I love that he would go and call out that one dude for stealing everybody's jokes. Right? Like, so many comedians in that world, like, have to be, like, timid, and, like, this guy was way more popular, so they just let that happen. And Rogan, like, he was like, no, fuck that. You guys are my friends. We're going to call this dude on this, and went and stood his ground, stood by his beliefs. And that's really cool, you know? That don't happen often in show business.
Yeah. Theo Von did it recently in a podcast. He outed someone for taking some of his jokes, and they're like, really? He's like, well, I didn't take it from him. So if they're both saying the same joke and Theo didn't take it from them, you know, that the implications are clear. But yeah, I think
that was Lil Dicky, wasn't it?
Lil Dicky, yeah.
I believe it. I mean, it's hard to. Lil Dicky has a show now too, and it's hard to come up for consistent jokes for a TV show. You know,
it is.
That's
and
where
I've
a lot
seen
of the
that
joke
show.
stealing happens. Is like comedians have writers and producers who see something, they're like, "Oh, I'll write that in."
And it seems like it's easier to get jokes and mix the variables around, but have the same sort of relations within the joke. So there's a form of stealing that's not directly stealing. It's not like if you insert, copy, and paste it, the computer won't tell you it's plagiarism, but it's still basically stealing, and that's done all the time.
For sure.
Yeah, it's like stealing the whole inside. Say it's like a robot. It's like stealing all the guts of a robot and then putting a new case on it and saying it's your robot, right?
Right.
It's on an aliens and robots theme, apparently.
Dude, the people I know who are like big Trump people, like right now, the place they're at, people who spend a lot of time on Truth Social, I've noticed, is where they all pretty much congregate now. They basically sound like revolutionaries. They're like, the government's corrupt. We need to go get them today. You know, people need to rise up against our corrupt government. They control our lives. They control everything, blah, blah, blah. But then they also have this big aliens thing right now. All of the Trump, I've talked to like 3-4 guys in their mid 40s who spend a lot of time on Truth Social. And they both, you know, talk, and they'll say, you know, why are we sending all this money to Ukraine? It seems like Russia's just defending themselves, stuff like that. And then they're like, also aliens are real. They showed up in 2 guys' backyard in Las Vegas last week, and the government covered it up. And I'm like, I don't know where you got that one from. The other stuff I'm totally with you on, but where is the alien? Where does that factor in here? Jamie pulled a bear, a video of a bear fighting communist aliens.
Who is Jamie? But the rest of that is amazing.
That's
Yeah.
Joe Rogan's thing. He's the
Does he have someone named Jamie? Okay.
He's the producer. He's the guy who pulls up the video. So Joel just goes, Jamie, can you pull that up? And it's almost always something to do with like a grizzly bear or something ridiculous, a mushroom.
he never gets as pumped up as he does, except when he's talking about like bears or animals, like large animals. He's always like so pumped when he does it. But thank you, JX No One. He says, I bought the No Great Wall book this weekend from y'all. It was epic so far. Yeah, that Carlos Martinez is such a superb historian, carrying on the legacy of Parenti. And that book on China is really, really good. And he also just released a sort of extended version of that in maybe a couple months ago. He had sent me a copy. It's really good. It's if you like the one that we published, you should also check this one out. The East is Still Red. Yeah, great primer on China. Both of them, the shorter version, which is maybe 80 or so pages, and this longer version as well. So check those out and check out his work and the Friends of Socialist China too.
Louis says he started a Truth Social account under the name of a female communist fighter to talk shit about DeSantis. That's a good use of the platform. Midwestern Marx has a Truth Social account. I made one and then I'd never used it. I don't know if we follow anyone besides Trump in like the gray zone, but
I don't even know.
Maybe we'll have to start convincing Trump supporters to embrace communism on Truth Social.
It's not a bad idea, honestly. You go where the people are, right?
Right, like we've advocated using every other platform and every other social media.
Right.
Why not use the one that Trump invented when he got banned from Twitter?
Well, think about it this way. If they're open to the idea that aliens are real, right? How much more open will they be to, oh, all the things you're saying, you basically sound like a communist already, right? Mm-hmm. And that establishment you hate so much are the ones telling you to call them communists, right? So really just look into what it is for yourself, man. Like, that's all you got to do.
Ben says, are there users on Truth Social? Absolutely. And I mean, think about what the Twitter files just revealed. Like people who are critical of the proxy war in Ukraine and Trump supporters, people who were challenging Joe Biden were being systematically censored and banned. So a lot of those people fled the platform and they're on Truth Social now. And it's a real like echo chamber, really. Of their ideology, but there are a lot of people using it. And like I said, when you talk to them, they kind of sound like communists. I have a wrestling coach who literally just drives and scrolls through Truth Social, like, your damn government, like yelling at us. But yeah, people definitely use it, including him.
I have had in the past much more success with people who are already thinking skeptically about the current state of affairs, even if the conclusions that they're coming to are not ours, than people who are just unquestionably accepting the state of affairs or accepting the narrative like, Trump is a fascist threat, that's why we have to defend the status quo, because the status quo at least is better than Trump. And so I don't know, man. I remember the little labor club we had in university. I think the vast majority of the people that we had there were previous Trump supporters. And it was a matter of just telling them like, hey, you're critical of like liberal media, just extend that everywhere in terms of media, and then extend it in terms of historical books and the way history is told. And, who is it that they want you to think it's the bad guy? Who is it that they want you to think it's the good guy? And why is that the case? And it's just, it's already in their common sense to think critically about a lot of these things. It's just a matter of extending it and redirecting some of those criticisms and then slowly inputting the right terms and the right concepts to things so that instead of talking about like globalism, you explain it's finance capital that we're dealing with, or instead of talking about like, a nefarious deep state, it's the capitalist state, and they've always been nefarious and worked behind the scenes and had to conspire because it's their class interests that are in line. And this idea, and Parenti debunks it quite well, this idea that it's crazy to talk about conspiracy theories, or what comes to mind is like tinfoil hat stuff, is it's pretty stupid, and it serves the ruling class because it's of course the ruling class conspires in order to advance and sustain its interest as the ruling class.
Yeah, it's and this is something they've been doing for a long time. It is setting up this sort of atmosphere where anyone who questions the official establishment narrative can be safely dismissed as a conspiracy theory. They build up this illusion of legitimacy of bourgeois institutions, right? The media, the government, even media that appears independent, like Breitbart. They tag themselves as independent, right? But they're owned by the Mercer cartel, right? The Ben Shapiro pretends that he's the owner of the Daily Wire, owned by the Mercer cartel. These are all part of the establishment media, right? And so when you go outside of these two sides they've concocted, you can be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, and they'll prop up and even fund the most out there of them so that you can be compared to that. Alex Jones went, he's changed a lot, by the way, but he had to go to court against his wife, and it came out in that court case that this is what intelligence agencies use him for, right? That he has contacts with them, and when they tell him to talk about something, he does, right? And he puts his own spin on it, and he even says he thinks that's why they use it. I mean, a little common sense can tell us that, just as Parenti said, what we have here aren't conspiracy theories, but conspiracy facts.
And the strategy of smearing people as conspiracy theorists has literally been around since the coup in Guatemala, which was one of the very first CIA U.S.-backed coups that was accompanied by a propaganda campaign here at home and a propaganda campaign in Guatemala, which included flying planes over the major cities and dropping anti-Jacobo Arbenz literature and pro-Castillo Armas literature. Was the military leader who the U.S. backed do this coup and oust Jacobo Arbenz. There was a leaked CIA document that said anybody who accuses the CIA of doing this or tries to tie the U.S. government to this is a conspiracy theorist. So it's an old strategy. And then, like Noah said, I think, to use Gabriel Rockhill's word, radical recuperators. There are a lot of radical recuperators in the sort of conspiracy theorist world. So people begin to question the mainstream narratives, question capitalist hegemony, really. And they get into these conspiracy theories, but then there's all these folks like Alex Jones who point them in the direction of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and, wrong conclusions. When in fact it's capital that rules the world, not any one group or ethnicity of people. So it serves to radically recuperate or get people to serve the maintenance of hegemony and the maintenance of the system who would otherwise question the system and be critical of it.
That's such a good point. And I think a lot of these terms, whether it's the purity fetish or radical recuperators or Gramsci's indirect apologetics, like it's wrong to just think of it in just one form or the most archetypical form that you see it or the form in which it was initially described. You have to start getting used to seeing how it is that a lot of these things are connected to other things and how they express themselves in a variety of forms. And that's really what helped me develop like the analysis of the purity fetish. It was first like, the way that Western Marxists view socialism, and then it just started developing into a bunch of different forms that helped me see the interconnection of all these things. And I think with radical recuperators, we could do the same thing because it's not just like the Zizek types and the French theory and the Frankfurt School, but it's also like Alex Jones and the conspiracy theory route. And one can even argue that in terms of like mass reach, they're more successful. Like Alex Jones is more known and more effective in like bringing to his side parts of the American people than like Zizek or the postmodernists or, the post-colonial, all the different posts are. So I think that analysis extending it to them is super right on.
Well, I also think we get into indirect apologetics, and that's how the entire middle class left works these days. right? And it comes from all the history we've talked about a bunch, especially Rockhill has gone into quite deeply with radical recuperation, with the creation of what we sometimes refer to as the fake left. All of this, excuse me, ties into the indirect apologetics, which the way it works, to sort of spell it out, is you're able to critique the system, right? You can say capitalism bad all you want, so long as there's no actual change in the real world, so long as every other system is criticized as worse, so long as there's no alternative, you can complain till the cows come home. It don't matter, right? But the minute you start to say maybe there's something to this whole, revolution to overthrow capitalism, building socialism thing, then you have a problem. If you have some excuse, like you say, oh, I hate capitalism, but the American working class, they're all settlers, right? They can't have a revolution. Then you can criticize capitalism. It's fine, because there's no implication of a real change in your conclusion, right? Or you say, yeah, capitalism's horrible. It causes all this poverty. But the American working class, they're bought off, man. They're all, they all have iPhones. So revolution's impossible. Don't even try. Just wait on everyone else to do the work for you. That's what it comes down to. And the implication is nothing can or nothing should be done. Then that's sort of the embodiment of an indirect apologetic, right? It's not it's apologizing for capitalism, but indirectly by saying you can't do anything about it, deal with it.
And not only is it not, it's not only not dangerous for the existing order, but it's beyond being not dangerous. It's like necessary for the existing order. And I describe this in the book as, a form of controlled, compatible counter-hegemony has become indispensable for hegemony itself, because we know that people are looking around at their life and they're like, shit, why are things so tough? Why am I in constant desperation to pay the bills and to pay rent and to do all these things? Why am I coming up short every month on bills and have to make all these tough decisions, when I look around and I literally see abundance everywhere? And eventually that accumulates, and at a certain nodal point, they're like, well, I think the whole system might be fucked up. And capitalism knows that this is the natural route that the people are going to take. So they not only do not fear these alternatives that people end up falling into because they're descending to the dominant order, but then that don't actually oppose it. Not only does capitalism not fear that, but it needs it. And that's why it funds it, and it funds these institutes, and it proliferates the magazines, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's become an indispensable component for capitalism. The same people that sit there and tell you that Alex Jones or Slavoj Žižek is the most dangerous philosopher in this, and they are just like the other coin of the same system and ideological order that needs both sides in order to proliferate itself. It needs, on one side, people to be completely deranged by these bad guys on, the Trumpers or the Zizeks, the most dangerous, etc. And then on the other side, it since it doesn't actually oppose, and its critique is not substantial, it's not of the system, and as Noah correctly described, it's often very culturalist, and it treats the existing order as eternal and all these different things. Both sides end up feeding off of each other, and that's the sort of ideological dialectic that has become necessary for the sustenance of bourgeois hegemony in our current day and age.
1000%, brother. It's sort of like it's why we always talk about wokeism and the mirror of wokeism, right? That this relationship is how the system perpetuates itself, rather than each side, which presents itself as somehow against the system, right? But this has been going on for decades, and nothing has changed. In fact, the system has consolidated its power over us, which in turn causes the revolutionary momentum we see here. But this is why we're always so focused on criticizing wokeism and the mirror of it, right? Because the relationship becomes the exact same thing as Democrats and Republicans, right? If you're an anti-woke or a woke, you're still participating in that same thing. You're defaulting because you have no solution other than to fight the other side perpetually. You're still participating in that main Democrats or Republicans thing, therefore preserving that status quo.
For sure. I mean, and that's why Carlos's book is so important and why it's caused such an uproar on the left. Because people feel called out by it in a way because they realize they're tailing these radical recuperators, right? And that can be tough to come to terms with, but it's something that we have to, the left needs to grapple with and tarry with and realize that, you know, the so-called most dangerous modern communist or whatever they describe Zizek as, you know, has disavowed existing socialism at every turn. And, you know, exactly as Carlos said, if you're not offering any alternative to capitalism, I mean, you're not really a communist or a socialist then, are you? If you say that capitalism is a terrible system, but it's the only one that can work, you're still a capitalist. You're still taking the same position as Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. You know, that's the role that Zizek has played whenever he's been involved in actual practical politics and organizing. He's been doing so on the side of the neoliberals and the imperialists, even when he was back in Slovenia.
By the way, thank you to David Burney. I always got to mention this, but our first ever Patreon. And that was so huge because we had just gotten started, and you know, having someone feel like they could donate to us and they had faith in the work that we were doing and the potential of it and building consciousness and fighting for socialism was really important. But my three favorite brothers in the cause. Good afternoon. Thank you, David. Thank you. And then I see we got a new super chat now. Let me scroll down. Kyle Pettis says, from Chomsky to Zizek, the non-Marxist Leninists parrot capitalism is the worst system except all the others. I call this the Thatcherite socialist, or the Churchill socialist, because Churchill has that famous quote of capitalism is the worst system except for all the other ones. And I also have a play on Leibniz, because Leibniz makes his argument that you know, this world has a lot of evil, but God's world is the best because it's the best of all possible alternatives. All the other ones would have been much worse. So it's the same sort of relationship. Like, yeah, you know, capitalism sucks, but all the other systems are much worse. Kyle says, so they can take the identity of the left while working against any actual change, like in the purity fetish. Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And that's why they're, you know, whatever you want to call them, the compatible left, the controlled counter-hegemonic left, radical recuperators, like all indirect apologetics, all these terms are really different ways of formulating somewhat of the same concept, which is that capitalism needs these people to distract the masses from going to the areas where actual substantial threats to the system can be made.
For sure, it's so useful. It's so useful. Like, I see it on TikTok, or I mean, I used to see it even more. Now TikTok is pretty much just banned anyone who calls themselves a Marxist for, you know, being a Russian agent or whatever. But back in the day, there were all these kids with all this revolutionary energy getting organized or getting radicalized through TikTok. And, you know, those kids are immediately looking for leaders and immediately looking to get involved and kind of naive about everything. So what is more perfect than someone who radically recuperates those kids, who says, you know, it's the most moral position to think that all Americans are settlers and that there can be no revolution in America. Or you should listen to someone like Zizek, who, you know, calls himself a communist, but recognizes that the Soviet Union was nothing but atrocities, and China was nothing but atrocities, and Yugoslavia was nothing but atrocities. You get all these kids with revolutionary energy, and then you filter them into a useless position, an anti-Marxist, anti-socialist position that pits them against revolutionary organizing in every practical instance. So I like what the point Carlos makes, that it's not just it's not just that these philosophies and these figures like Zizek aren't radical, but they're necessary for maintaining bourgeois hegemony. Like the bourgeoisie needs these radical recuperators to maintain itself.
And not
thank
only
you,
that,
Kyle. You're the man. Kyle's a truck driver and a hardcore organizer. So solidarity.
not only that, let's not forget that Zizek worked with the CIA, against actually existing socialism. Always look at the real world outcomes of what happens, right? Don't just listen to what people say. Look at the real world outcomes and the implications of what they're saying.
Right.
Something else I wanted to add, but I totally went out of my head. I apologize.
Right. That's covering what Gabriel Rockhill calls the political economy of knowledge, right? The material financial forces, institutional forces that propel these ideas and the different forms that they end up taking. But thank you so much for the super chat, Kyle. Sean Moon says in his book, Land of Idols, Parenti calls them the Anticommunist Left. Yeah, I think that's a correct statement. Gabriel Rockhill also uses the term, the acronym ABS, anything but socialism, Marxist or critical theorists. And then Parenti also calls them left McCarthyists in Black Shirts and Reds, which is really good. And I think today perhaps we're seeing a form of communist left McCarthyism in the way that a lot of people in communist spaces are taking up the narrative that, this thing called America is irredeemable and communism is about abolishing America and separating yourself from many of the traditions that your people hold dearly. And, not only does it alienate them from their people, but it puts them in a very almost chauvinistic position. It ends up having them express a form of liberal tinted American exceptionalism because they think that, well, everywhere else in the world, socialism has had to adapt to the conditions of those places. Socialism has always been the content, which, as Dimitrov said, takes a national form in various contexts, a universal that always has to exist in a particular concrete form. But here in the U.S., that's not the case. We can just reject everything from our past, consider America redeemable, understand it in a very one-sided and undialectical and metaphysical form, in a very static form that fails to account for contradictions, developments, the potential for change, for qualitative changes. And we can do all of this and still have socialism. And that's a form of exceptionalism. And it ends up just completely accepting all of the narrative about the relationship of communism and socialism to America and Americans and the American tradition that McCarthyism tried to associate in the minds of the American people. So what we ended up fighting so hard against in the 20th century, in the 21st century, communists have just accepted. And the image that I use is that the gun, the ideological weapon that was pointed at communists by the McCarthyites and the anti-communists, which were always conjoined with racism and homophobia and stuff like that. Winston calls it the twin weapons of capitalist imperialism, racism, and anti-communism. But that weapon that was pointed at us in many communist spaces, we've taken it from their hands and just pointed it at ourselves. And at a time when the American people are suffering in ways in which they haven't before, we're seeing the first generation in American history that's going to live lives worse than their parents. Again, first time in American history. And this is all happening while empire is crumbling. De-dollarization is on full scale by 2030. Only 30% of international trade is going to be in the dollar. And, things are getting hot. And while things are getting hot, you're seeing all these different forms of radical recuperators or indirect apologetics or anti-communist leftists or left McCarthyite communists or, purity fetishes, controlled counter-hegemonic agents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a million terms for it and for the different forms that it takes. But it's important to critique. Criticizing it gives us ideological clarity into our social totality at the moment, and it helps us prevent other people from going into those spaces that ultimately waste their time if what they want their effort to be going towards is actual advancement of the class struggle and actual revolutionary transformation of the current state of things.
That's really, really well said, brother. I think we can look at how this has developed historically, right? During the McCarthy era, this is exactly the ideological sort of weapon of the ruling class. And it filters down into the middle classes, right? And so you have these middle class sort of what they call social justice warriors, right? Who begin getting involved for moralistic purposes. And these lies, such as, there's America on one end and communism on the other, and they are completely contradictory, get accepted within that, right? But this middle class has we kind of like socialism, though, bent to it because of this moralism, right? And as we see the working class leaving the left and the middle class overtaking what the left is, we see more of a proliferation of this bourgeois baseline assumption that conclusions are based on. They're all the exact same assumptions. Just like, Carlos, you were talking about with modernity and Heidegger in the last stream you guys did together, right? They're the same assumptions, but a different opinion about what those assumptions mean. And that is why today the bourgeoisie will promote things like the settler colonialism thesis, right? And the 1619 Project, which is the New York Times, the media apparatus of the enemy, right? And they will minimize, they will censor voices like ours, right? That promote a more scientific view, that say what you're saying here about this impossibility of American communism is objectively wrong. That's not how the world works. And I think we're sort of seeing a return to this scientific analysis in our day as reproletarianization happens. And that's why you see calls like what Carlos just said to criticize these things, right? It's that creates its opposite, us.
Have you ever considered that science would consider you a settler?
Do you have the picture of Noah as a settler? The one that you sent the other day?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's on my Twitter. Hold on.
So we have factual scientific evidence of Noah being an actual settler.
We do. Noah was literally one of the pilgrims. He was one of the first people who came over here. Here he is. There's Noah. This is AI technology utilized science to look into Noah's background, and they found that he was one of the original settlers.
But I did have a dope hat while I was doing it, so it's fine.
Right. We hope that he was arguing against the treatment of the indigenous people at the time, but
I was too busy settling, dude. How could I have argued?
Right. So shame on you, Noah. Shame on you.
On behalf of all my fellow settlers, my bad.
Sorry. This comment is good. I starred this one to react to. Had a class on Marx in my political philosophy class, and the professor took 5 minutes to say Bolshevism isn't Marxism. I think that's so typical of the Western Academy, and so funny. The fact that they only took 5 minutes, right? They didn't engage with Lenin's materialism and imperial criticism. They didn't engage with any of his deeper works, digging into Marxism. They didn't engage with the Soviet manuals. They didn't engage with any of it, or what the Bolsheviks are saying. They just say, nope, this isn't real Marxism. Marxism is when you sit on your ass and wait for socialism to appear out of nowhere in a perfect idealistic form. The Bolsheviks didn't understand it. Moving on. And it's just such a fraudulent way. And you can do that in the U.S. because, the hegemonic idea is that socialism has always failed. You have academics who just defer to that idea rather than doing, what would be intellectually difficult and rigorous, and engaging with the scholars of the Bolshevik Party. Instead, they just dismiss it with a 5-minute mini lecture before they go on to talk about Marx. And I've seen even non-Marxists notice this. Like Carlos sent me a video the other day. It was, I can't remember who it was, but some professional philosopher talking about Marxism and the connection to Hegel. And all the comments were like, thank God, finally somebody talking about Marx without a 20-minute introductory lecture about how I might accidentally starve 1 million people to death by reading Marx. It's like every Western academic has to do this huge disclaimer like, yeah, everything Marx said was really prescient and it makes a lot of sense. But keep in mind, you might starve 2 million Ukrainians if you read it and you believe it too much. And it's just really silly. And yeah.
People can tell it's like it's offensive to them because it assumes that they're stupid enough, and it's kind of like those advertisements. Um, I was building a desk, and within the instruction manual, there was like use a hammer to hammer this in, and then next to it said not the actual size of a hammer, happy face. It's like, I mean, you think I'm fucking stupid? Am I gonna hammer it out with a little thing? Like, it offends our intelligence. Or like those pill bottles that they say to be ingested by the mouth. Where else am I gonna snort the pill? Am I gonna snort vitamin C or something? No. And so it's that similar sort of disclaimer when they're talking about Marxism, and people are catching on to it. And that's why these radical recuperators are necessary, because the old school direct apologetics, like if you learn about Marxism and if you read the manifesto or something, you're going to kill 10 million people. It's not working anymore. And, I doubt it worked at one point because of so much fear mongering, but it worked in a very small portion of the population. Like, Black people didn't buy into it. By the great majority didn't buy into it. There's good interviews of Angela Davis saying like, Black people are more predisposed to communism precisely because they recognize that the same powers that oppress them as a Black people is the one that's telling them that communism is all bad. And so if their oppressor is telling them these guys are the real bad ones, then you have to really look at, well, are they bad? And so there's more of an openness to that. And that's been the case in other parts of American society as well. But today, it's this anti-communist direct apologetics of the system is less successful than ever. Like, the amount of resources that PragerU throws at their videos and at their work, and then you look at their Facebook and it's like 3 laugh emojis. It's like all the reactions that they get. So it's, people are not buying it, and that's why they need the radical recuperators, because that's the more advanced form of trying to get at the same thing as like PragerU, but just in a more complex form that's better at fooling people.
And PragerU is fooling less and less people as time goes on. Like, let's be real. As people, just go ahead, Eddie. That one got me.
That was a really good one. When we nationalize IKEA, Carlos will have a non-squeaky chair. Nationalize whoever the hell makes WD-40.
You should hear it when you're on the phone with them. It's worse.
And then you have the dog barking in the background too. The Chihuahua.
Sounds like I'm in the middle of a fucking zoo.
It is.
Okay.
Oh,
so radical recuperation and PragerU. It's that relationship between the two, right? PragerU doesn't fool many people anymore. It really doesn't. It exists so that the radical recuperators have an enemy, right?
And that's
they
why
can say these are the bad ones. And I mean, you can look around and say, what are you talking about, PragerU, right? Or you can just hate the radical recuperators so much for being so irritating that you side with PragerU because they're the only ones criticizing them.
and
Right?
that's
So
what,
I often say that we don't really have much of a right in the US the way liberals describe it. What we have is an anti-fake left.
Mm.
and that's like the propaganda's not working. That's partially why all the corporations had to go woke after the George Floyd uprisings and stuff like that, because there was sort of an awakening across the country that something is systemically wrong, right? There's something wrong with our system. So what corporations have done is try to co-opt all these social justice struggles and entirely focus them on identity politics. And, the goal is now diversifying the 1% rather than redistributing their wealth. And, then they've co-opted those struggles and then sold them back to us, marketed them back to us. But that's the that's the dominant form of bourgeois ideology now. You know, it's not even necessarily folks like PragerU. And you've seen a lot of interesting developments in the Republican Party where people are moving towards populism, and are moving towards these populist demagogues like Trump rather than the establishment candidates, because the, you know, Republican Fox News mainstream propaganda isn't working that well anymore. And the people who it is are, you know, not to be morbid, but they're going to die soon. Like, they're like 70 years old. Those are the kind of people voting for Mike Pence and, you know, listening to Sean Hannity. So I love my grandparents, by the way. But Kyle Pettis says, sit around and wait. Typical Menshevik take. Exactly. Right. And the Mensheviks, you know, they were the Bolsheviks' allies in the lead up, in the Iskra period, as Kyle called it once in a phone call that we had. But, you know, when the revolution popped off, the Mensheviks just wanted to sit around and wait. And actually, this is lesser known, but you had a similar situation in Cuba, where the Communist Party of Cuba didn't really like Che Guevara. They thought he was an adventurist. They thought the country wasn't ready for revolution. Che's like, what the hell do you mean? I'll just take 12 guys into the jungle and then we'll incite a revolution. And they did.
And that's exactly what the right opportunists of today say, right? They don't come right out and say, I'm a Menshevik, sit around and wait. But they say we need to defend the status quo against, that's great. We need to defend the status quo against Trump and Trumpism, and Trump's a fascist. So we need Joe Biden, who is somehow not also a fascist, to bravely defend us against Trump the fascist. It's so silly. By the way, Biden just wandered off of an interview. Wandered off. Just got up and left because he's confused. At what point are we participating in a mass clown show of elder abuse? Right? Where he's an evil man. But dude, he's also old, and you're propping him up to do this at a point where he's so confused and doesn't know where he is that he gets up and wanders off. Like, shame on the deep states, or whatever you want to call them, apparatchiks, forcing this, right? That won't just go, all right, time to call it a day on Biden.
And it tells you how lowly the ruling class thinks about the American people, where they're like, yeah, this is our guy. Just feed this guy to them. They'll take it. They'll accept it. And they're not. But, you know, as to the question of the old school anti-communism and the way that it takes in PragerU, and the way it's like not taking that form and other forms of more radical recuperator-esque discourse, that hasn't been really updated in a lot of the Marxism books that are coming out of the West. You have, and I mentioned this in my book on the dialectical materialism, they treat the critique of socialism, Soviet orthodoxy, anti-Stalinism as a sort of theoretical huangguan, which is the term for the Korean tradition of taking off your shoes before the door. Like, before you can even start a book on Marxism, you have to take off your shoes, and taking off your shoes is, you know, talking about how bad Stalinism was, and how the Soviet Union wasn't real socialism, and how we have to actually go back to the real Marx now, and all this other bullshit. So, you know, it's not that anti-communism is not alive and well, but it's taking much more nefarious forms, and forms which pretend to be at least friendly with socialism, Marxism, or their specific form of utopian purity fetish communism.
For sure. And again, that's why I think the purity fetish book is so important and with the work Gabriel Rockhill is doing, to engage with these things in a mature way, you know, because there's been some reaction to the, you know, sort of woke leftist anti-existing socialism, sometimes politics on the, you know, that perpetuates online, a lot of angry reactions and a lot of emotional reactions. But I think it's more productive to write a book like The Purity Fetish and engage with these things on their philosophical foundations, and really make a systematic critique of the left and the things holding the left back. So, just really recommend people get that book and read it. Most of the critiques I've seen against it from people on Twitter are people who like obviously haven't read it.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, what you just expect nowadays. But yeah, you want to get into our story about the Teamsters?
Yeah, which one? Because we had the writers one, and then we have the UPS one.
Yeah, I think we can just run them back to back.
Okay. Yeah.
I've got the UPS one pulled up right now. Big victory for the Teamsters and the UPS workers in their negotiations. They demolished the two-tier system, which was one of the main demands of the UPS workers that we've talked about. So during Teamsters tweeted this, during a hard-fought day at the bargaining table, the Teamsters reached a tentative agreement with UPS on 3 major economic issues. And here, see pictures of the negotiations that they shared. Said tearing down the 22.4 two-tier wage system established Martin Luther King Day as a full holiday for the first time and ending forced overtime on drivers' days off. So huge gains for the workers, sort of common sense things that they were using to draw attention to this, or that we were talking about when we were covering this. Where it's like, how were these not things that were enacted already? How were these not protections that were enacted already? But you see, when it comes to class struggle, we have to fight for everything against the bourgeoisie. Everything has to be fought and earned. And, every protection that we have today, it didn't just come as a gift from the bourgeoisie to us. Every protection that our class has today was fought for by unions and workers and revolutionaries struggling in the past. So the extraordinary gains, each of which have been key issues for the hashtag Teamsters throughout the year-long contract campaign, came on the heels of an aggressive public warning from the Teamsters National Negotiating Committee that UPS was running out of time to get a deal. Earlier Saturday, hashtag Teamsters General President Sean M. O'Brien reminded more than 340,000 members at UPS, as well as elected officials, that any continued inaction at the world's largest logistics company would bring the U.S. supply chain to an abrupt stop. And yeah, I mean, these delivery workers, these transportation workers have a vital role in the economy, in what Marx would call the sphere of circulation or the sphere of distribution, and making sure that all of these products are delivered to where they need to go, which allows the capitalists to complete the sale of their product and transform their commodity back into money.
Can I say they move 6% of the GDP in the U.S., so it's got a very big influence in the economy. So.
Which is gigantic. And let me just jump in real quick.
Please.
Forcing drivers into overtime on their day off isn't just horrible to do. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
There are were very strict regulations on how long you can drive, how many days in a row you can go, etc. There have been a lot of struggles within that field over those because people die. Lots of people die when you just force workers to keep going, fall asleep. It can be horrible. And the whole time they fight to roll back every single gain we ever make in anything. So seeing these things is really cool.
It is. I see Kyle saying Teamster power, and I know Kyle's a truck driver, so solidarity there.
Yeah, and just real quick, like, I think it's important to make this more general point, which is that these victories are premised on very difficult struggles and a lot of suffering that had to take place before the idea of having to struggle for these things even came to mind. And this is a condition that the working class is always going to be in, insofar as we continue to exist in the dictatorship of capital, insofar as control over how we produce and control over the state is held by the capitalist class. And these victories are phenomenal. They're huge, as I saw Louis here say how big this was. Those are big wins for real, and they are. But we should also see it in the context of, like, we're going to continue to have to fight tooth and nail for these very small things that improve people's lives tremendously and that are only sensible. But do we want to continue having to fight tooth and nail to get crumbs, or isn't it better perhaps to also conjoint with that struggle fight for an order and for a form of life that makes that sort of fight irrelevant because you're the one that's in power, because it's the working class who's deciding things and not having a bargain with a capitalist pig, but deciding itself through its state how it is that things should be done. So this should always be kept in mind, because there is an alternative world which is possible, in which these negotiations don't even make any sense, because it's the working class, the one doing the work and producing the value, who gets to decide how it is that things are done.
Absolutely. And look at the position like these guys take in the negotiations. Are the capitalists and the bourgeoisie ever negotiating for something that helps people? Right? It's always them negotiating for something that makes people's lives worse and maximizes their own profits. Whereas the working class and the unions are always in the position of arguing for something that makes workers' lives better. Why would we not want the class that wants to make people's lives better to be in power? Why would we want the class who's always prioritizing their own profit over humanity to have power in all of these important decisions? So tweet goes on to say, gains made by the Teamsters at the national table with UPS today cannot be overstated. From the jump, the UPS knew we demanded an end to forced overtime, the respect to take MLK Day as a real holiday, and the complete destruction of the unfair 22.4 wage system, O'Brien said, the Teamsters have achieved these critical tentative agreements for our members, but make no mistake, we are not done. Love to hear it. UPS knows we must reach a full agreement on other economic issues, including higher wages, within the next few days. As we continue to reinforce the hashtag Teamsters demand that a historic new contract is in place by August 1st, O'Brien said. Under the new economic tentative agreements, all drivers currently classified under the 22.4 system would be reclassified immediately to regular package car drivers, placed in seniority, and have their pay adjusted to the appropriate RPCD rate. So a lot of these are technical and particular to the UPS workers, but very big deal here, and really happy to hear that they're going to keep going.
Just to talk about the 22.4 system, for those that don't know, it's a system that was adopted some years ago, and effectively what it does is when new people are employed, they're thrown into this system, and it gives them less control over their work, which is very important, but it also caps the salary that they can go up to. So the salary of workers that are not within the 22.4 system can be capped at, I believe it was $41 an hour. For these people that are in the 22.4 system, it'll be $6 less. So it'll be $35 an hour. And that accumulates to make a very big difference within a month, a paycheck, and obviously a year. And it could potentially be a difference in life standard completely. And if this 22.4 system would have been proliferated, it would have ended the conditions of somewhat comfort and benefit that some older drivers that are under older contracts had.
You know what I really, really, really like about this entire thing is the Teamsters knowing what power they have, using it, and talking like it. But the way things are presented, we often forget how vastly important that is on an ideological level in our era. Our era of bull monopolization, that brand association is tied into the way we think based on the relations we must engage in to keep reproducing society. And so for them to sort of talk this talk, right? Like say, look, we're going to keep going. We know exactly how powerful we are, and we intend to fight. It's huge, absolutely huge. I also want to bring up there it is, Swirling Dervish, who said they had a friend who died in a car wreck from working 2 weeks straight of night shifts, ran off the road. First of all, I am so sorry, and I know I speak for Carlos and Eddie on this about your friend, bro. That's horrible. But this is what happens when they do this to our class. And this is a perfect example of why we need to fight, just as the Teamsters are fighting now. I don't care where you are. Do it. Get up there. Get organized. Fight back, because that kind of shit happens daily. And just like nobody, talked about this in the press, they don't talk about it every other time. It's just one of us. But every time, it's one of us getting hurt, getting killed because of their policies that are in place to make them money.
Sorry, yeah, I relate to this too. My buddy, one of my best friends and wrestling partners from high school, he was the 113 pounder and I was the 120 pounder. So obviously we wrestled together a lot. He was very good. Both made it and placed at state together. So a lot of great memories. And he died recently in a drunk driving car wreck, and, he wasn't the one driving. But it wasn't specifically from overwork, but me knowing him and knowing his life, I know it was from overwork. I know that he grew up in poverty, and turned to alcohol, and he was working this shitty moving job, just hours and hours and hours every day. And all he was able to look forward to was drinking on the weekend, until an accident took his life. Like, I consider it a death of capitalism. I consider it a death of alienation. That's how I think we should look at these things. And you see how much attention like the Ocean Gate submarine got compared to when anyone in the working class dies, even if it's a death of capitalism, right? And we have these ridiculous works of scholarship like the Black Book of Communism, tallying up deaths in the Soviet Union or whatever, but they have nothing to say about the death of capitalism, the people who died from overwork or being pushed into alcoholism or whatever the hell else. And going back to what Noah was saying earlier, it's great to see that workers are finally recapturing or re-realizing their position, right, and their power. The fact that these bourgeois parasites have nothing without our labor. That's absolutely correct, and I think that's what's going on nationwide now. It's slow but sure, but with the emergence of Chris Smalls and the Amazon unionizations, the Starbucks unionizations, the John Deere strikes, the UPS union efforts, like, class consciousness is rising. Workers are realizing their value, realizing their power, and you have a younger generation who has watched their parents get screwed over repeatedly. And, even kids whose parents are like, well, my boss gives me a job, he's a good guy, I don't want to disrespect him. The kids have watched that year after year after year and watched their parents get screwed and watch their parents end up with no damn retirement money. And I'm speaking a little bit from personal experiences or experiences of my friends here. Watch their parents grow up working their butts off to end up with nothing because they're being exploited the whole time. It's like, okay, I see the game here. I see what's going on. I need to fight back against this boss if I want to retire, if I want to have a comfortable life for me and my family. So I think that's going on a mass scale in this country. And this is just one of many examples right here.
It absolutely is going on in a mass scale. Ask anybody from, the younger generation, like Eddie was just saying, they grew up seeing their parents, being so nice and considerate of the people exploiting them because that's how they were taught to look at it, right? Yep. And because of this, we see it. That creates a condition where we can go, no, they weren't being nice, right? They weren't providing a job. They were getting rich through exploiting them and then leaving them with nothing, taking all of that time, that energy, that effort, taking all of that, and then leaving people a hollowed out shell and just throwing them away when they're done with them, with nothing to retire on, nothing to live a dignified life as you get old, right? We should have a program in place that takes care of our elderly people after they put in decades upon decades to society, right? To working to create things. But it doesn't. And the only way we're going to get that is if we fight to get it.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much to Kyle Pettis again, Comrade Kyle. He says, I encourage everyone who is in the U.S., chances are that there's a UPS in your area, yes, If a national strike does happen, join us on the picket line. We 100% the Institute will bring something as simple as coffee. It means everything to us. Absolutely. And we did that with John Deere when John Deere went on strike last year. We did it in Dubuque and in other parts of the country. We brought pizza and we stood with the folks on the line. And it's so important to be there. And it also teaches you so much. It helps you divorce yourself from a lot of these unhelpful tendencies on the left that are like, if someone doesn't agree with me, full stop on every issue, on every grocery list style approach that I take to politics, and I'm not going to talk to them or I'm not going to organize them. Well, you go on the picket line and you stand with workers and you bring them pizza and you stand in solidarity and you realize it doesn't matter who the fuck they voted for. It doesn't really matter what some of their social beliefs are insofar as they're, and so they're workers and they're striking to improve their material conditions as workers, as part of the working class, the universal emancipatory class, which is objectively revolutionary, regardless of the subjective consciousness of some individual workers. And if you're a socialist, that is your class. That is the essence of the struggle for socialism. Socialism can be defined, in essence, in the struggle as the conquest of political power by the working class. And that movement towards organizing that class in order to grab political power and establish its own state is fundamental. So you have to stand there with workers and, just shed a lot of these online and somewhat toxic forms of engagements with other people, where if they don't fully agree with you, then I'm not going to talk to them or I'm not going to organize with them or whatever.
That's so true, Carlos. It's like what Che used to say about being forged in the struggle, and about becoming a better revolutionary through engaging in struggle. Obviously, it's a different form of struggle. He's talking about mostly like guerrilla warfare, and we're talking about going and standing on the picket line. But I mean, that was my experience too with the John Deere strikes. Like, it helped me better understand the Trump phenomena, standing here with these workers who want everything I want, higher wages, better contract, all these things that, material forms of class struggle or material gains for the workers. But most of them voted for Trump. But, when you're standing out there, you're standing at the picket line, not really doing anything anyways. So you talk to each other and ask them, why'd you vote for Trump? Well, Obama said he was going to change all these things, and then he didn't. And Trump said he was going to bring the jobs back. And, Hillary's husband, Bill, signed all these laws like NAFTA and TPP and outsourced my job. And, they might throw a couple like culture war issues in there too that they care about. But the basis of it is that they didn't feel that it was in their class interest to vote for Hillary Clinton. They don't feel like the Democrats are representing their class interest or the interests of the unions even the way that they used to. And Trump tricked them with his populist rhetoric, so that's the case for a lot of them. And by talking to these people, by immersing yourself in the proletariat for real, not just talking about it on Twitter, you come to understand their consciousness better, and you can help reorient their political consciousness. How about this Cornel West guy? A lot of them are into RFK right now. Talk to them about that.
Yeah. Exactly. And this is sort of what the middle class left doesn't get, because they don't leave that middle class and talk to workers, right? Exactly. They see middle class Trump supporters saying crazy stuff on the internet. They don't go into the working class and go, why'd you vote for Trump? You will never, ever, ever hear someone go, well, he let me be racist. Well, I liked that he was racist, right? What you will hear is he will say, I hated that he was racist, but he was talking about bringing that job back that I lost 10 years ago. He was talking about bringing the jobs back that my dad and my mom had, right? And that is down the line what you will hear. This notion that everybody's like somehow evil and a racist and a fascist is made up within the middle classes. And guess what? The middle classes are all but gone. Stop worrying so much about them, and let's get things done in our class, or maybe the class you're falling down into right now.
It's so common to hear, I like Trump, I just wish he would stay off Twitter. Like, do you know how many times I've heard that from like working class Midwest people in the last 3-4 years? They don't like his more bigoted tendencies in a lot of cases, but they like his economic populism. Same reason Tucker Carlson had the most popular show on cable news. You know, I'm sure the immigrant bashing had something to do with it, but it was more so his populist rhetoric.
Right. And his critique of the elite. And, you know, a lot of these people, like, I wonder what the folks in the coast think of, like, the Midwest, because a lot of these folks are in the Rust Belt. And it's like, who the fuck are they thinking about when they think about people in the Rust Belt? I've traveled to a good number of the places in the Midwest, and um, even the ones that are very white are still somewhat diverse. And I can't help but think that, you know, these people that are voting for Trump, that are in these areas, that are working class, like, it's that the sort of anti-immigrant rhetoric, or the anti-Muslim rhetoric, it's distasteful for them, because a lot of these people are in their communities, they're in their workplace, they consider them one of themselves, one of the people in their communities, and one of their co-workers. Um, and you see it in a place like Dubuque. Yeah, it's primarily white, but you know, in every workplace that you're in, you're going to be with people who have a different, you know, ethnic or racial or religious background than you do. And it's once you're in such proximity with people, it's hard to keep up these attitudes. So like you said, Eddie, what I find often is that they vote for Trump because of the populism, because of the critique of the status quo. And even if a lot of them realize, as they do, that he's not in substantial ways too different from the people he's criticizing, at least the rhetoric is there, whereas they don't see it in anyone else, because the candidates that, you know, are speaking in such ways are not promoted by mainstream media, and they don't have access to, you know, Americans' homes in the same way that, like, Trump and Biden and others do. So yeah, that's why when I make it a point to say, whenever I speak about this in conjunction to, like, the specific form the purity fetish takes in this area, I say, even if it was true, and I premise that by saying that in my experience, which has always been in primarily in the Midwest, it's not. But even if it was true, you're still supposed to get to them and talk to them, because there's always going to be a rational kernel, because they're working class people, that you can get and reorient towards socialism, and away from the more unhelpful views that, honestly, a lot of them I don't see having.
Here comes the catchphrase. Precisely, brother. Right. But know that the revolutionary subject is a concrete material manifestation of capitalism. It is the relations that the way production is carried out have to cause. It is the revolutionary subject, therefore, is not these people who say things that, you know, middle class liberals in New York consider nice, but the working class, right? And this ties into something I want to real quick before that. Yeah, something that Sebastian G has said, that many in NYC just see Midwesterners as primitive, in a sense. It's very bizarre, but that's exactly how they see us, as backwards rubes who just fell off the turnip truck to go see the bright lights in the big city, right? When I lived in LA, this was long time ago, darker time in my life, I was able to get out of trouble with the cops by playing on that, right? By still having an Ohio ID and go, oh, I just got off the train here. I didn't know any better, officer. You know what I mean? Like, and they bought it, because these sort of classes in these giant metropolitan areas that sort of aren't in the urbanized inner cities, but on the exterior part of this. And there's actually really good Chinese theory that describes the periphery and center, but whole another thing. But they do look down on all of us. They do see us as less sophisticated, as not as smart. And frankly, it's bullshit. And what we're seeing, a lot of the frustration that Trump people have, and why he found such a base in rural areas, in the Rust Belt, in the Great Plains, is because everyone is sick of being looked down on by these gentrified hipsters. That's really what it is, you know?
I wasn't going to even go off on this until Noah did, but it's so true, dude. And I see it on Twitter all the time. These people from New York or California, they'll always try and give me a lecture when they don't think I'm talking about identity politics enough or whatever. They always say my name. It'll be like Eddie, comma, followed by lecture. Or I always read it in the most condescending way, like, no, Eddie, this is how things are. No, Eddie. And I'm like, you're talking down to me like you're lecturing me, but I just think you're an idiot who doesn't read theory. I know you think I'm dumb because I lift weights and I'm in the Midwest, but that's another thing they do is like attack me for exercising all the time. Like, oh, Eddie mixed in a little glue with his protein shake today. I'm like, first of all, bitch, protein and creatine are good for mental cognition, as are exercise. Second of all, I'm sorry that you're jealous that you're not as smart as me or as jacked as me. But attacking someone for using protein isn't a very good insult.
You don't use protein, you abuse it. Because that fucking thing you did today,
you guys want to see a picture of Eddie's protein use? Hold on.
Ridiculous.
Dude, I know.
Where's our text thread? Here we go. Hold on. They need to see
a whole cup of protein.
It's literally more protein than water.
This is Eddie. You see the protein, the smaller cup? That is all protein powder.
Keep it up. No.
That's the cup he pours it in.
It's a bigger scoop than a cup. I'm basically just eating clumps of protein.
That's so disgusting. Oh my god! But you have to do what you have to do. I just want to give a quick point on this historical one. When after the Second World War, there was a fad about everything American, specifically in France, right? And in this period is when existentialism is taking off. And we have this idea about the French existentialists as, you know, just the black turtleneck and just everything dark and gloomy. But in reality, a lot of the existentialists were in love with the popular culture of America, with, urban culture. People like Sartre, de Beauvoir, and others, they would take trips here to the U.S. and visit the inner cities and the parts of the United States that, you know, if you're white, the white people that you would be associating with, the artists and stuff, would tell you, oh, no, you can't go there. And they would go there and they love these places, whether it's, in the inner cities or in the Midwest. And they ended up taking up the style of like the flannels. And so there's this image, and Sarah Bakewell talks about this. You know, we have this idea that in France they're just wearing the turtlenecks, but the existentialists were actually wearing flannels, because they fell in love with American popular culture and like working class people's culture. And the reaction of like the American intelligentsia, specifically of the corners of the country, the New York and California, was like, what the hell? You know, like we always have this inferiority complex as American intellectuals, where we have to look to Europe, France, and Britain and Germany. And theirs is real intellectual work. Ours isn't. And so the intellectuals in the U.S. were like obsessed with all these different sorts of artists. And then when they saw the French come and just be obsessed with like popular working class people's cultures and movies and shit, they were like, what? This makes no sense. But it tells you that like from, it's not new, the way that these PMC types in the corners of the countries and the big metropolitan areas, the way that they see regular working class people and working class people's cultures, and not only like the Midwest, but also like the urban areas that their suburbanite communities end up surrounding.
You know, first of all, I apologize, everybody. I keep having customers from work call me for some reason. This has never happened like this, like 5 different customers. Anyway, but I heard Carlos say flannel, and I was like, oh, I got to get back there right now.
I think I have 700 different flannels, so I'm glad to hear they're in style and envied by all the French intellectuals who I hate.
No, post-war. So in the 50s.
Okay,
right? Because gotcha. we have at that moment like a blooming of American culture, and it's like the movies, the music, the jazz and stuff, and the French fell in love with that, and the American intellectuals were like, oh my god, this is like low life, low culture. Like, how can you like this? You know, we're reading Goethe and listening to Beethoven and Wagner. Like, how are you coming here to listen to Miles Davis or whatever? And they're like, no, this is like the good stuff. We like the movies, the action movies, the jazz. We like the flannels. So yeah, they stuck a big middle finger into this this attitude from the metropolitan areas of the nation.
Always
really
a
awesome.
different form of elitism. It's always a different form of elitism because that's what that class embodies, and it has to look down on us in the working class to give itself a validation and make sure it stands outside of us, right?
Right. Yeah.
Nowadays
And
we're not woke, so
it's becoming less popular too. Like you don't build a mass audience that way. And when these when these people have their cancel campaigns of Midwestern Marx, like I don't even notice it anymore. Like our followers don't change. Like we have our core audience of working class people and good people, and we're attracting more every day. So if some Brooklyn hipsters on Twitter cancel us, I don't even feel like most of our audience notices, and if they do, they do not care.
Right.
Hey, shout out to we missed this super chat from Duck Hash Browns. Did you have something to say on that topic, Carlos, or you want to move on to the super chat?
It was just somewhat related with Battle Cossack. If you have that like woke moralism as a precondition for working with people, how can you support Palestine's struggle? How can you support any struggles if people that are in parts of the world where their social views aren't as so-called enlightened as ours, but who we still have to support full stop because they're battling for national self-determination, for sovereignty, and against imperialism. And a lot of these people that are woker and have this sort of form of engagement at home, they have to have this romanticized image that they project about these other struggles abroad in order to support. Because if they were to engage, they'd realize, well, there's some contradictions that that you wouldn't like, but that it's just their culture and it's not ours, and we should still support them because they're fighting for self determination and sovereignty.
And
well,
if you
it's like
go,
what really bothers me is I'm sorry, Eddie.
no, you go. It's your turn.
What really bothers me is they somehow draw this line and call people social reactionaries and social progressives, as if there is some disconnection you can make between the relations of production and social consciousness, right? And first of all, reaction is not just conservative values or being extra conservative or whatever you want to call it based on opinions and whatever that don't have a concrete form, right? Reaction is this sort of force that is interested, materially speaking, in going backwards, right? When Marx in the Communist Manifesto talks about these sort of old classes that were dying away, right? Like the peasantry. He says that their interests are conservative in that they must maintain what is, nay, reactionary. Actually, their material interests are somewhere in the past, right? And that's what he's talking about as the reaction. And reaction is always this sort of trying to move backwards thing. It isn't family values or whatever you want to call social reaction or social conservative. That's a nothing. All right. Get that out of your head. What matters is the actual concrete forces in the world. There is a material progressive force and a class struggle and a material reactionary or conservative force. And there is a class struggle, right? And you see at different times history, the sort of conditions on the ground make this look different, right? And for example, the civil rights movement, right? This was class struggle reaching a political revolution. And it took the form of the Black freedom struggle, right? And that creates the conditions we continue struggling in now. So to pretend that these like social opinions have anything to do with this is to divorce them from production itself, which means that you're denying Marxism. So if you want to talk about this, we can talk about it, but don't call yourself a Marxist. A Marxist while you're doing it, because you're not.
Yeah, and this is another reason why it's good to organize internationally, because like Arab, Iranian, Palestinian communists feel this, or they know this inherently, because they see that the way that woke imperialism is used to try and force Western cultural values onto these countries, or even justify military aggression against these countries or economic warfare because they're not woke enough, because they don't have the same kind of social views that we have. So they often see it as a form of imperialism. And yeah, that's why it's good, like I said, to organize internationally so you can get those different perspectives and don't end up in a bubble of Westerners, who would dismiss a lot of Palestinian comrades or whatever as social chauvinists or social reactionaries or whatever, which doesn't make any sense. So I want to address a couple super chats here. Thank you, Duck Hash Brown. Sent this a while ago, but really appreciate you. Big super chat, $10. Thank you so much for funding our project. This will go right to the Get Eddie an iPad fund because my phone's got about 4 days left before I have to stop making TikToks on it. But anyways, McCarthy has to go down as a top 5 propagandist of all time, at least. I mean, he might be number one, other than I would put Bernays up there. But if you talk class issues without the Red Scare buzzwords, almost everyone likes what they hear. Throw socialism in there, though, or communism, or Marxism. Yes, great point, Duck Hash Browns. It is genius propaganda, and unfortunately, it's propaganda that a lot of the American left is internalized. You hear a lot of American leftists repeating McCarthyite talking points. I made this point on Twitter the other day. Someone was talking about how the American people are inherently dumb and bad. Like that's, the McCarthyites said that communists want to destroy America, that they hate America and they hate Americans. And we say, no, that's not what communists want. We want to sublate the country. We want a working class revolution in the country. And then these rad libs are like, no, we literally hate Americans. We literally hate the working class. So, yeah. And got another super chat from the Fine Arts Revolution. Thank you so much. Says just recently found you guys solidarity from us at the Fine Arts Revolution. Very interesting name. I'd be super interested to see what kind of stuff you guys are putting out. We've been talking about revolutionary art a lot at the Institute lately, just and at the because entertainment media is so powerful as a propaganda tool. There's a reason that so much money is dumped into controlling Hollywood, and why the military has such a control over Hollywood, and why the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom heavily funded abstract art, heavily funded the works of Andy Warhol and Jackson Pollock, and boosted these kind of abstract artists rather than as opposed to the sort of socialist realism that was coming out of the Soviet Union at the time. So really interested in what you guys are doing at the Fine Art Revolution. I pulled up your Instagram here. It looks like you're posting some cool stuff there. This one's funny. Organize. So anyways, thank you for the super chat, and I'm looking forward to looking into what you guys are doing. I should have known that one was going to get Noah.
It's a dad joke, right? I can't help myself.
But honestly, doing art is so incredibly important, whether it's like visual art like that or music. It's so important because it gets at another dimension that just like theory or political analysis doesn't do, which is like the emotive dimension. It's able to motivate people, and that it's not that you can't like motivate people through like a good pamphlet or something, but it's never going to be the same as like with music. And it also has the capacity for popularization that's much wider. And honestly, we should, from a tactical standpoint, learn from the ruling classes and how it is that they're successful and sustaining hegemony. And like art is extremely important. Not that we should use it for the same ends. Like we always know, we've had this discussion about Bernays, like, should we be like learning from Bernays, and what would be the difference of like communist propaganda? And I think it's easy to tell that the difference. Ruling class art and propaganda, it's made to make you stop thinking, and to, when you think in ways that turns the world upside down and force you to participate in what we call false consciousness. Communism wouldn't do that. It would just help you be a more concrete thinker and engage with truth. But the form of like propaganda I think is something that we should study. And art, undeniably, is one of the most essential ways that the ruling class sustains hegemony. Like the American assumption, what Du Bois called the American assumption, the idea that you can work really hard and get rich and hustle and get rich. Like without all of the art that promotes those ideas that we engage with from the time we're beginning to be socialized in this country, it'd be very hard to buy into that. But we get it in every single music genre. We get it in movies. We get it in shows. We get it everywhere. And so we believe, well, maybe one day if I work hard enough, I'll get rich. Less people are believing it now than ever before. But art is extremely important, and we need to develop revolutionary art. So um, all the best to you, comrades at the Tafar.
I mean, there's a reason that you see so many guitars in the background when you're looking at me or Eddie, right? There's quite a few back here, right? And it's important. It's inspiring. People often, because we're very scientifically minded with Marxism, treat us as if, you know, we're forgetting the passions of people and inspiration, but it's the exact opposite. The exact opposite. We're very interested in these things. We're currently working out maybe a certain day where you'll be able to hear us playing music involved with some other people and a whole bunch of other activities that day. It's in planning stages, but if you bug Eddie enough, you will be able to get him to do a song together with me, and I'll hold him to it. So
I tentatively announced the other day our big long event that you're referring to there.
Oh.
If you want to kind of talk, I mean, it like Noah said, it's still in the planning stages, but definitely a musical segment would be awesome for that. I guess we can probably just say it since I said it on the other stream, but we want to do like basically a telethon type fundraiser for Midwestern Marx. Noah had the idea of mixing a debate in there somehow. If we can get one of our opponents to agree, do a musical segment, do call-ins via Discord, lots of fun stuff. So, look forward to that.
Despite what any sort of very strange people may tell you, we are not funded by any institutions, George Soros, or anything like that. And so it's hard to keep doing this every day. But you know, what does the public funded bourgeois institutions do, right? They do these telethons and NPR auctions and stuff like that. So we think doing something like this, an all day event where we're streaming the entire day and people are coming and doing segments. And like Eddie said, that we could have a debate. We could have different workshops, musical things, all kinds of stuff. Maybe comedy. Is there someone who's a comedian? You know, like Eddie said, it's early days planning, but look forward to that. It's going to be really fun when we do it. And hopefully we can raise enough money to produce some really, really cool things for you guys.
Right. And we, a big push for us doing better fundraising has been from the audience, like not just ourselves. Like it's the most dedicated part of our audience that's already funding and that shares our stuff all the time. They've been the ones telling us that we got to figure out better ways to fundraise so that we have more resources to do more work, because our work works. We've transformed the consciousness of a lot of people, and we've received comments from like people who organized the first Starbucks who were inspired by some of our work, and people in ALU and various struggles in the labor movement and community organizing and socialist parties, that's important. And so this idea of a fundraiser, a telethon drive is in the spirit of following through with what our audience and what the Institute, really, because the audience is really a part of the Institute, its foundation in many ways, what they're asking us to do.
Bake sale, I'm all about it. But my wife bakes the best cookies you will ever see in your life. Ever. they would make us millions.
This was the Midwestern Marx Institute when we got accused of being funded by Soros. I just thought these guys were funded by Soros. Carlos thought I was funded by Soros. Noah thought Carlos was funded by Soros. And then we realized, holy shit, none of us are funded by George Soros. We're all really just poor guys trying to help. So, yeah, it turned out that nobody was funded by Soros. But you know, it almost brought the institute down for a little bit.
Most open society recipients start on food stamps.
Oh man! Someone asked you, Mouse SF, any bookstores in I imagine it's San Francisco, not South Florida, carrying Midwestern Marx Institute books, especially the Purity Fetish. I'm not sure. We have it set up so that if bookstores want to pick up our books, they can do it automatically. But one of the things we've been thinking about is, how can we systematize a sort of approach to get our books into both libraries and used bookstores. I know there's a few used bookstores carrying our books. I know there's one in Carbondale called Confluence Books that they have a copy or two of the Purity Fetish and some other of our works. But yeah, we would like to make an effort, perhaps before the year ends, to get more of our books into the places where you can just walk in locally and buy them. If anyone has any ideas on how we can go about that, to also reach out to us.
Connections.
Or connections, right? I think a lot of it is on an individual asking basis.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're a student and you ask your local school library, like, hey, I want to get this book. Can you guys order it? They'd be able to do it, and then we'd be on their file, and they can continue ordering whatever new stuff we put out. So that would be a huge help.
I was going to say, if you're in San Francisco, just call City Light. I guarantee you, if you call asking, they will go, okay, how can we get this?
That's the Parenti publisher, right?
City Light's a famous bookstore, and they do a small thing in San Francisco. Yeah,
that's helpful for us too. Obviously, if you can get them to carry our publications, obviously it's really helpful for the institute. So, yeah, I also want to say I love this idea. Eddie should do push-ups, and we can pledge an amount per push-up. So then it's up to me how much we can raise. That would be awesome. Either push-ups straight. I think I can get 100. Joe Rogan did 75 on his show the other day. If I got to rest in the push-up position, I might be able to do 150. We'll see. I don't know. That's a lot.
If we're gonna do a debate, do a push-up contest and the debate.
Yes. Then I'll do a push-up contest with Vaush. It's on.
Do you know we can't even do a single push-up? He would never agree to that.
Destiny might be even worse too. That's the person I want to debate right now. But I like this idea. Push-ups in an hour would be really fun too. I would probably push myself to the point of heart attack. But do you guys want to move on to the Marvel studio that got shut down? The other story we have about the Teamsters. So we're just talking about the Teamsters in relation to UPS, but there's also been the writer's strike going on recently, where a bunch of writers have gotten organized and have gone on strike. So this has been covered by Adam Conover from Adam Ruins Everything, who's not like a Marxist-Leninist or anything, but he's a lot of his content has been focused on class struggle and union organizing stuff lately, and he actually either he follows Midwestern Marx now, or he followed our old account that got deleted. It's hard for me to keep track anymore of the celebrities who followed us before our accounts got deleted. But either way, he's been a follower of Midwestern Marx in the past. So yeah, this was him on the picket lines with Hassan Piker right there.
Oh yeah, my buddy Hassan.
Noah's favorite.
We grew up together.
They grew up in the LA suburbs together. This will probably increase your opinion of Hassan, Noah.
Yeah, I've spoken a little out of turn about him. I have a very big prejudice against rich people. Have my whole life. It's an issue of mine. Oh, we got no sound, brother.
So we could. You want to try to go shut down a Marvel shoot?
Wait, what? Really?
I think the shoot that they need more people to try to shut the gates down. So we could try to go do that if you want.
Yeah, I would love to shut down a
shoot down there. They need
Marvel
help.
shoot.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's go.
Let me look it up.
Yeah.
If we go create a picket line at this location, the Teamster trucks won't cross, and the shoot will shut down. Yeah.
Stuck here till I'm gone, but nobody misses what you did quite like I do. Got me thinking about it all day long.
Find a spot, I can explain to you what's going on here. So
By the way, this kind of stuff inspires me when I see like this like well-edited minute-long content. I'm like, ooh, I gotta up my game with the TikToks. Like this kind of production value just makes these videos so much easier to watch.
as you can see, there's a shoot happening right here. We're walking down from one entrance to this entrance. We're going back and forth, which establishes a picket line, and the Teamsters have like honored our picket line. The trucks are not coming. So this shoot is currently shut
Real
down.
quick, can you pause it?
Here, but
Another brilliant thing is he's explaining for people who don't yet know what a picket line is. And he even has a little graphic. That is fantastic. Real respect for that. It's really good to just get, because all of this stuff is only coming back right now. So people don't, a lot of the sort of veteran organizers, and actual veteran organizers forget that a lot of people have no idea how any of these things works. So I really like that he explains that for people and has a little visual. That's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, when I saw this video, I'm like, okay, this guy's on his game as far as the production value and stuff goes. Which he's worked for College Humor and worked for a lot of production studios. So I think there's a lot to learn from him there.
here, but we have to stay here
I'm
in
glad-
order to keep the shoot shut down. And so it's just like fucking holding a vigil, you know. You want to try to go shut
So I'm
down
glad that this is where he's focusing his energy. You know, it's really, really cool to see, honestly. And this was a great video. So great job to Adam Kahn over there. And solidarity with these workers. You know, a lot of times, obviously, there's a lot of propaganda that gets pumped out of Hollywood, but, you know, that's from the movie studios, that's from the intelligence agencies, that's from the Pentagon, who has a deal with Hollywood where if you use U.S. military equipment, they basically get to come in and alter your script and edit your script however they want. So it's the writers who get screwed. It's the writers who have their stories altered by these studios to make them more palatable and make them more in line with the hegemonic ideology, neoliberal ideology. And it's the writers who are often underpaid and overexploited. So, yeah, I don't think there's any need to poo-poo these or say that they're not real workers or whatever, you know. And you have the Teamsters Union helping them out, or they might even be part of the Teamsters Union, the writers. I'm not sure exactly the dynamics there, but solidarity with them.
Yeah, they're in SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, or the Screen Artists, something, I think. But writers and production crew are routinely underpaid. Unless you're some big shot in Hollywood, you're not getting paid a lot to write, because they know they can easily replace you with a million other people that have a dream of writing movies or writing TV shows or writing a web series or whatever it is. And so good for them for putting it on the line here. And you saw what happened during the big writer's strike a couple years ago. TV went to crap and people noticed and stopped watching. And so what they do can be effective. I think, I had something and it's gone. Go ahead, Carlos. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some people online talk about like, well, these are the ideologues of capitalism, and I mean, there is some weight to that. I mean, if we accept that media is in some ways destined to entertain us to the point of forgetting about real struggle, or to through entertainment get us to accept ruling class ideas, I mean, it is right, but they also hold this ambiguous character where they can be brought in, should be organized, should be participating in the class struggle, and they can have they can have their minds clarified about the existing order, and a lot of them know through, as Eddie had mentioned, through how the certain interests, the military-industrial complex, and other interests that are always in the backgrounds of movies and Hollywood, how they manipulate the things that the writers write and how they limit the writers' creative freedom. A lot of them have, because of those direct interactions in their work, already sensibilities that are against the people that do that to them at work. So it holds an ambiguous position, and that being so, we should definitely support their struggles. And also, it's not unfair for people to mention, well, they do this. Yeah, they do that. They do function as ideologues in certain ways, but they're also affected, and it's much more complex than just them being agents, ideological agents for capital. And we should observe those objective contradictions. And if we're okay with the idea of of getting people from the military and bringing them to our side, and we see that as essential, and we saw that it worked with the Bolsheviks, with the Portuguese, and with the Venezuelans, etc. Of course, we could do that with the writers, right? So, yeah.
It's funny. I recently, my son got very into the old Hunger Games series, right? So I rewatched those movies with him, and
Pretty good.
the way they portray the sort of propagandists of their revolution is really cool. They're waging a revolution against an exploitative, oppressive force that keeps the workers in destitution. Just like the working class is being driven into that now, right? So what they do, though, is they're very, very pragmatic and matter of fact about the propaganda and how it has to be presented to win. And there's, corruptions within that and all that, but they understand that writing can be a huge benefit to you. If you have people that have that, and it's not always just skill, there's a lot of skill involved, but there's also some talent there, right? If you have people that have that talent and skill of knowing what is received well and combine that with a revolutionary message, that can blow up, right? I don't think we should ever undersell how we package things affects everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I wanted to pull this up too. Thank you, Kyle, for illuminating how this works. Any union on strike means a Teamster can't cross the picket line. It's in every Teamster's contract that that's trade union consciousness and solidarity. Yeah, that's an awesome aspect of what the Teamsters do. I did not know that, but that's totally builds class consciousness and solidarity, like you said, with the whole working class, not just with the Teamsters Union. I remember when the John Deere strikes were happening, you would have scabs who would drive equipment out of John Deere, allowing equipment to keep going out that had already been built and weakening the strike. And they would honk at the striking workers and be like, yeah, go, you guys are doing great. And it's like, but you're scabbing, you're hurting them, right? So they didn't understand that by crossing the picket line, they were hurting the workers. So that's also why this union education is so important, and strike education is so important, and why it's so important to go stand at the picket lines and figure out how they work yourself, so you can educate others on it. I also wanted to bring this up. George Lucas actually famously said that Soviet filmmakers have a lot more control over their films than he does in the U.S. They, have to be careful criticizing the government, but he's constantly having his stuff tweaked by the studios, the corporate movie studios in the market, really.
I do like movies. I love movies. And I know a lot of movies aren't popular. And you can say that going in. One of the reasons I retired is so I could make movies that aren't popular. Because in the world we live in the system we've created for ourselves in terms of, it's a big industry, you cannot lose money. So the point is that you're forced to make a particular kind of movie. And I used to say this all the time when people back when Russia was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And they'd say, oh, but aren't you so glad that you're in America? I said, well, I know a lot of Russian filmmakers. They have a lot more freedom than I have. All they have to do is be careful about criticizing the government. Otherwise, they can do anything they want.
So what do you have to do?
You have to adhere to a very narrow line of commercialism. And there's only look, when I started in the 70s, it was like this. I could say Russia was like this, but we were like this. You could do a certain kind of movie. And I flaunted that system. I mean, THX, my first film, is definitely not an American film, and I shoved it in sideways. Francis helped me trick the studio.
Yeah, right.
They would have never let me make that movie if they knew what I was doing.
George Lucas is quite based. He's also explicitly said that that Star Wars was about the Vietnam War, with the rebels, the Vietnamese rebels being the good guys, the Viet Minh, and the Empire being the Western powers, obviously. And he made a similar comparison, I think it was during the war in Iraq, about how they were just demonizing Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi people in order to destroy them, similar to Vietnam. So, yeah, shout out to George Lucas.
And that goes on to show that, like, the relations of production, they not only fetter the ability to produce more and more efficiently, but it's not just the economic base that's fettered. It's also the superstructure, right? The ability for people to do art freely, the ability to philosophize freely, et cetera, the ability for culture to develop is also stifled and fettered by capitalism, because that too has to develop only insofar as it is in line with the bottom line, and the bottom line is profit. So creativity ends up being like a secondary, like latent effect that maybe it happens where you end up finding it in movies, but a lot of the times what you end up having is, and I hate to bring them up because we disagree with them so much, and they're like sort of the archetype of the purity fetish Marxists and the radical recuperators. But the one part of the work of Horkheimer and Adorno that I do like is their work on the culture industry, and how it is that because of this profit motive and this universal commodification, you end up just producing and selling the commodities that are safe to sell. And that ends up homogenizing everything, and everything just ends up sounding the same, looking the same. And I mean, for God's sake, look at movies today. It's so fucking predictable because it's the same thing that you've seen a million times over, except with some different variables. Look at songs. And I'm talking about every genre. Every genre of music that's commercialized, that's in the mainstream, sounds the same, whether it's Spanish music, whether it's rap, whether it's pop, whatever it is. It's a constant reproduction of the formula that they know is going to get sales. And that stifles creativity. And artists know that if they step too much beyond the lines of what's already been proven to be successful in reaching a lot of people, they might have more difficulties in selling their albums and in getting contracts, et cetera, et cetera. So it stifles not just our ability to produce more and more efficiently, but it's a whole stifling and retarding of culture.
And this is precisely, we've had this discussion before about the sort of commodification of country music, which is something we're all very invested in as big fans of it, as sort of an inherent part of our culture in the US, but especially in the Midwest. You can't look at Luke Bryant and Conway Twitty as the same thing, right? Conway Twitty had the showmanship and all of that, but Luke Bryant is a packaged commodity that we're being sold. No tea. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Brian. Right.
Sorry.
And he's very different from, let's say, Zach Bryan today, right? Who made it on his own through getting popular from his social media, versus that packaged deal, which is really just pop wearing a cowboy hat. It's the same musical formula they use to sell Britney Spears, etc., but it's them reaching a different demographic. And this is how they approach all art, not just music.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the resurgence of like Tyler Childers, Sturgill Simpson, Zach Bryan, these a lot of times very pro working class country artists who are not as into the mainstream, very pop trends. But yeah, after 9/11, things got really bad. Alan Jackson released that song, Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning? And all these country artists realized they could use super patriotism and 9/11 as a cash grab, to the point where you have song. And I mean, at least like I know Luke Bryan at least like has a farm. He at least lives on a farm. Some of these guys are literally just pop artists living in penthouses in Nashville, writing country music. But you got these like blatantly pro-war songs like Toby Keith's Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, which I ended up giving my wrestlers a lecture about last year. I'm usually not that guy. Like, enjoy your culture, enjoy your art, you know, when you're not being exploited or alienated. I don't care if you like the Marvel movies, just understand how they're, you know, filled with propaganda. They're still cool. But listening to the lyrics of this song, brought to you courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, just Toby Keith jerking off to the bombs that the U.S. is dropping on Iraq, you know, the illegal invasion of Iraq that killed millions of people, you know, hundreds of thousands of children. He's like, brought to you courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue. Like, that's not a good thing, you dipshit. You shouldn't be patriotic about that. But it shows, you know, the co-opting of country music by the ruling class, which is the opposite of its roots. You know, there's videos of Chris Christopherson, Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, and Willie Nelson talking about the Sandinistas and support for the Sandinistas. Chris Christopherson's got a whole song about it. It's really fantastic. So, yeah, it just shows the perversion of art, and like Carlos says, the fettering of the superstructure and the production of truly great art. And Che has a quote like that, like capitalist art, you know, is dead or whatever, basically.
Yeah. In Socialism and Man, he touches on it. And the thing is that, you know, there's this misunderstanding that Marxists don't care about culture or the superstructure or whatever, orthodox Marxists. And that's not true. We see the economic base as fundamental to understanding culture, but we still consider culture to be like, you know, some of the highest forms of expression of human creativity, and we consider it so fundamental. And so when you stifle culture, you're not just stifling a specific culture, you're stifling humanity, right? So capitalism ends up, it's in its essence a fetter on the potential of humanity. It's a system of waste, as the British socialist whose name I'm forgetting sadly, but he was an important artist himself, and one of the first Marxian socialists in Britain. Jesus, the name is slipping. But he called capitalism a system of waste, right? And it's not just a waste of things that creates this environmental catastrophe that we have on our hands, but also the waste of human potential. It puts a fetter on humanity. It limits what humanity can actually achieve, and that's itself a crime against humanity, because it's deeply human to be creative and to develop, and capitalism stifles that. But yeah, you have the comparison with the war in Iraq, like Toby Keith, and then you have on the other side this dude that John Prine, right? He's got that song, Some Humans Ain't Human, and he's got a line where he's like, and when you're feeling your freedom and the world's off your back, some cowboy from Texas starts his own war in Iraq. And then the chorus comes around, which is, some humans ain't human, though they speak like we do, though they stand like we do, etc. It's basically saying, like, how can we consider this guy human? That's just starting a war on a whim, and killing millions of people and throwing all of our lives in disarray for no reason, just for the sake of, you know, the profit of his shareholders. And he doesn't go that deep into it, but in terms of its contrast to Toby Keith and Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, it's telling. And then which one ends up being commercialized and popularized and put on country radio stations? It's Toby Keith. It's not John Prine.
And that's because Toby Keith is developed as a commodity, right?
Yes.
And it's very interesting how, you can see people like John Prine, like Willie Nelson, embodying the genuine spirit of the American working class, right? And therefore being more genuinely American than all of these sort of manufactured, prepackaged pop rockers and cowboy hats could ever do, even as they're being super patriots, right? To use the Parenti term. While they're saying they love America, what they're doing is betraying everything the people here stand for and believe in, right? Not to mention that Toby Keith is super racist, right? He's literally like referring to Hitler in a song, I think. I could be wrong about that, but there's like some like message where it was weird. Also, there's one last thing I want to say on Toby Keith. Do you remember that Tom Segura joke about Toby Keith's "I love this bar and grill"? Because it is one of the funniest jokes. Sorry, for anyone who's a big fan of stand-up, and Carlos and I have talked about Tom Segura for hours on the phone. But yeah, good stuff. Toby Keith's "I love this bar and grill."
He's also become like super elitist recently. He's made some really stupid comments about like the poor people that watch him, and it kind of sucks. I've gone more towards although I still love him and Bert, and I think they're hilarious. And his wife Christine is funny as hell. His mom is so funny. But Theo Vaughn ends up like being like one of the only ones that still like acts like a poor guy, like a poor working class dude. And of course he has, you know, some of his flaws, but he's still a working class dude with a podcast that's fucking hilarious. Whereas Tom and Bert and all these people who were perhaps, you know, came from working class communities, they've just been absorbed into the sort of Hollywood elitism.
Yeah, and I'm a huge Tom Segura fan too, but I'm pulling up the video I made about him. Like, his comment was freaking, I want to slap him in the face when I heard it. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, dude? Like, shut the fuck up. This isn't funny.
You're in control of your own situation and your own feelings. So don't put it on me that you feel bad, that I have something that, but I'm struggling with rent this month. Figure it out, okay? Like, don't make my life be a problem for your life.
Dude, shut the fuck up. You're a comedian, dude. All that money you have comes from working people in your audience. People are taking the very limited amount of money that they make at their job where they do something productive for society, and they're paying it to you for jokes, for entertainment. And without them, you don't have anything. Anything. All of your wealth comes from those people who are struggling to pay rent. And it's not just that they're lazy. Like I said, they're doing something productive for society. They just don't get paid as much as you for what they do. And this is coming from a longtime fan of Tom Segura. He just came off as such an a-hole in this clip.
And what he was responding to was fans complaining to him about their economic conditions. Because him and Bert just sit around talking about their luxurious cars and their watches and their Rolexes, and the fans give them shit. The fans say, it must be nice to have Rolexes for telling jokes. I can't pay my rent. And instead of laughing it off like a normal comedian, Tom Segura had a little hissy fit. You know, oh, don't make me feel bad because I'm rich from telling jokes while you're poor from busting your ass all day. Like, I don't really care about your feelings, big dog. Like, you should probably feel a little bit bad about that, or you should at least be more appreciative of your audience who can't afford rent, despite the fact that they do something far more productive for society than you ever will.
Yeah, that's spot on, brother. It's like, who the fuck does he think he is? Right? All of his money comes from these people who are all struggling, right? Most of this entire country right now struggles from paycheck to paycheck, unsure if we can pay rent next month. That is a reality. And for him to just get all pissy and like butthurt because they're saying, dude, we don't care about your Rolexes, right? I'm sorry to say this, and usually I have a ton of respect, especially for people as funny as him, but tell the jokes, clown. Shut up about that shit.
Right. It's not like he is funny, but when him and Bert are just talking about how much money they have, it's like I don't give a shit. That's what the fans were mad about.
Right, exactly. And like, be thankful and grateful you have it like that. Right, number one. Number two, telling people you're responsible for your own situation. Motherfucker, you are a famous comedian. All right, you can't talk about people's situations when you have this 1 in 100 million job, people's dreams. All right, you know, I'd like to talk to this guy one time because, for real, maybe I don't want to talk to him because it may not end in just talking.
Don't meet your heroes.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these people are cognizant of the fact that they had to live like shit for 10 to 15 years on the road, doing really shitty spots and living horrible, forced to eat bad, and they got so many stories out of it. And you know, they get some money, and after a few years, they have this transformation, and they end up reading that struggle instead of like, damn, why did I have to struggle like that when what I was doing is, you know, it's not as productive as like building a bridge, but you know, what would our lives be like without comedy? You know, I listen to comedy all the fucking time. It's such a way to keep the weight of life off of me, at least for a few minutes or an hour or something. So they're doing somewhat useful work, and why would they have to go through such hell to do that? Instead of that being the realization and critiquing the system that forced them to go through those 10, 15 years of struggle to then be able to tell their funny jokes to an audience of millions, they say, oh, I deserve this because of that. And it's kind of like the same logic that people use where, you know, they had to pay off their loans for 10, 15 years, and therefore they don't want other people to just have their debt removed. It's like, fuck, man, instead of like realizing like, hey, I shouldn't have gone through that in the first place. If someone else can be prevented from going through that, good. They end up taking this pride in the fact that they were exploited for 10 to 15 years, and now they're somewhat okay. And that just makes no sense. And I saw someone use the analogy of like a slave. If a slave was, if a slave used that logic, like, man, I've worked my whole life, and now they're just going to free these dudes after the emancipation project. Like, that's fucking so stupid. Just because you've gone through hardships in the past so that you can be somewhat okay now doesn't mean that I don't see how that logic ends up transferring itself to it's okay what happened to me, I want it to happen to everyone.
Real quick, the one thing he and all of these other people that follow this forget is that there is one commonality they all have: luck. They got lucky, period. Yes, you need that talent, you need that skill, but the reason you made it is luck. Millions of others are just like you with that talent and skill, didn't have that luck, and they struggle their whole lives, fail, some become homeless trying to do it, etc.
You're just jealous. No, for real. Like my roommate's trying to do it right now. He you know, is constantly doing these crappy spots to be a comedian, and then the comedy store in town just shut down. So that might screw him over. Now he might have to make a decision where he has to move if he wants to pursue his career. So there's so many different factors like that go into it. He's told me a million times, like, you mostly have to be lucky. You have to catch a break, you know, and then these people like Segura, you know, they have hard work and talent, but then that gets combined with luck, and, you know, they think I did this. I got myself here, which is why it's good to why I wanted to remind him, like, all of your money comes from working class people, you know, paying you a fraction of their wage to see you. So to have disdain for those people is like the most disgusting thing you can do as a comedian. So yeah, anything else you guys want to talk about before we wrap her up for today? We've been going for over 2 hours. We'll save our reaction video for next time because it'll take a while to get through, but yeah.
I was thinking we could go real quick through the science of logic in its entirety for the next 37 hours.
Just
That's
really
quick. Marathon.
We need
That's
history and philosophy before we even get to that. So
right. The marathon should be just us three popcorn reading The Science of Logic for 10 hours.
I will not make it through that. I will jump out of my window. You guys might be. Carlos will be able to do it.
I am currently going through Science of Logic again, along with another one that everyone will consider boring. I'm reading this Destruction of Reason by Lukács. Finally came here. I ordered this like months ago. But I do want to say one thing before we go, though. This week's Basics of Marxism class is moved to Wednesday because tomorrow is the 4th of July. Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern. Zoom class, you all know where to meet. Everybody else will be live streaming it. And I think Carlos has something to talk about on that day, too.
Yes, Wednesday is the first Marxism and History of Philosophy class. It's the class that I'm teaching on Marxism and the History of Philosophy, where I pick out certain specific moments that I think are very important in the history of Western philosophy, and I bring them out to light. We go Plato, and then back to the pre-Socratics, and then forward to Aristotle, and then we skip to Feuerbach, and then we go back to the moderns and Hume and Descartes. Then we go a few things, and then we end in Hans-Georg Möller's Pro-Felicity to talk about the role of technology today and how we should be thinking philosophically and as Marxists about technology and social media and profile curation. So it's basically a spin-off of the class that I've been teaching for maybe 4 years now, of my Intro to Philosophy class, and a spin-off and a development of that class, so that I have a lot more freedom than I can't just indoctrinate kids with Marxism. I have to be more sneaky about it. But I have obviously a little bit more liberty, so I want to connect a lot more readings and be more explicit about what's important here for Marxists and for developing ourselves and being better at as members of this class struggle for political power for the working class. So that starts Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central. Nova's class will be at 4. So you have around 3 hours. If by any chance you've been signed up to both classes and that's going to be a problem or something, feel free to contact us and we'll see what we can do. I'm looking forward to it so much. And as far as the school, we'll have 2 or 3 more classes, hopefully ready within a month to announce. Danny Shaw is going to be teaching a class on Marxism, state, and various revolutions, which I took a glance at the syllabus and it looks amazing. Like, I wish I could take it myself. Eddie's going to be teaching a class, hopefully, on imperialism and media literacy, and it's going to be amazing. And then Tom's going to be teaching a class on anti-Düring, which Lenin called the handbook of Marxists. So it's such an important and comprehensive account of Marx and Engels' thinking. So a lot of exciting stuff at the Marxism School part of the Institute. And then as far as the publishing press, we have so many projects. It's kind of gotten overwhelming. And we've been thinking about doing calls for people who can help with editing. But the most near to publishing one that we have is Tom Reagan's commentary on Engels' Ludwig Feuerbach and the Outcome of Classical German Philosophy. Perhaps, within the top 3 most important philosophy-centered books that Marx and Engels do, and he's dealing directly with what is the role that Feuerbach and Hegel have played in Marxism. So such an important and often underread classic. And we have a commentary from Reagan's on that coming up, and we also have a book from Yanis Iqbal on the role that neoliberalism has played in transforming education. We have hopefully a pamphlet pretty soon from Noah Krashvik, that guy right there, on reproletarianization, expanding his theory of the death of the middle class. Hopefully something from Eddie on the Venezuela book that should be coming out soon as well. A book from Mitchell K. Jones on the history of utopianism in New York. And there's an incredible, extensive list of projects that is very, very exciting, but getting kind of overwhelming. So if anyone there is listening, is a good editor and wants to help, please shoot us an email.
Absolutely. I think my class will also focus on propaganda production. I'm trying to figure out if I want to do like an entire class on that or not, because like there are some things like video editing and stuff that we could get into that would take a little longer. But if people are interested in that, plus that might help us train people who maybe want to work with the Institute and help us do some editing and stuff. So yeah, lots of stuff to look forward to there. And yeah, I think we've gotten through all of our updates. So we'll see you all next time. I'll leave you with this. The Turning Point UK, I guess the Turning Point USA is in the UK now. They said, our activists got attacked by members of the Socialist Workers' Party. These people are animals. And prepare yourselves, trigger warning ahead, for the vicious attack. The Turning Point
Look at it.
How did this man survive?
Can I say one thing?
Please.
For the sissy, this guy goes out of control over having some scratches on his forehead. My favorite thing is there is a public and a private option in the UK. Guess who they called?
The public. No way.
The private one's too expensive.
So you hate socialism, yet you use the public roads and you call the NHS. How curious.
It looks like he fell asleep on his book bag in class.
It does. It really does.
Oh
Poor
my
guy.
God. And these are the people that call like Marxists or communists like soy boys or whatever derogatory thing that they use to label us as weak, and they're literally the weakest.
Meanwhile, here's my face after a wrestling match. This is what the right wing considers beat up. This is the left.
There was a period of time where I never saw Eddie's face not beat up. I was so surprised when one day he just popped up and he was just not full of scratches and stuff all over his face.
Yeah. You guys should have seen me in my late 20s when I was doing kickboxing. Same thing.
Yep. I'm getting back into that. I had a big scratch the other day, actually. I've been getting on the map more. But all right. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us today. Thank you to Cobra, Jacob, Ware Pilgrim, all of our moderators. Thanks to everyone who interacted with us in the chat and all the super chatters. We'll be back with another stream within the next few days. I'm sure I'll do a power hour tomorrow. Then Carlos and I have our stream Thursday night, obviously. So yeah, lots to look forward to. We'll see y'all.